So for decades, top American universities have been trying to increase the diversity of their student bodies in terms of family income. They want to have every really well-qualified student come and enroll, regardless of how poor he or she may be. Why is that? Well, essentially, equal educational opportunities for students with equal qualifications is the key to a meritocratic society. Schools like Stanford also believe that students learn best when they're not just with other students who are highly prepared, but when they're with students who are diverse in terms of family background. A few years ago, Chris Avery and I were trying to help Harvard University understand why, after it had made the cost for low-income students equal to 0, it still didn't have very many low-income students in its population. And we heard a lot of fatalistic talk. People would tell us things like, look, it's so disabling to be from a low-income background that those sorts of students couldn't possibly end up being prepared to go to a place like Harvard. Or, you know, it's not just about having high-quality high schools for them. They really need to be removed from their families and their communities just after birth and sent to residential schools. And, you know, that's how they're going to be prepared to go to places like Harvard. It's not just about schools. It's about all kinds of things. Well, OK, Chris and I are pretty data-driven people. So we didn't believe it. We looked at the data, something called the search files. Those are lists of high-achieving students in the United States. And we thought, you know, we're seeing some strange patterns. What we're seeing, maybe there are a lot more low-income high achievers in the United States than anyone thinks. And maybe the reason why they're not on anyone's radar screen is that they're not applying to any selective college or university. And that moment was the beginning of the quest that I'm about to tell you about today. So, what did we do? We discovered all of the low-income high achievers in the United States. We figured out who they are and where they are. We figured out why it was that they weren't applying to any selective college or university. And then Sarah Turner and I found an intervention. We invented something that closes the information gap for these students and allows them to have much more equal educational opportunities at a low cost. So it's practical. All right. What do I mean when I say low-income high achievers? Well, what I'm referring to is students from the bottom quarter of the family income distribution. That's about $41,000. They have college assessment scores in the top 10%, that's the ACT or the SAT, and they have high school grade point averages of A- or above. People thought that there were about 4,000 of such students in the United States because that's about how many of them were applying to some college or university that was selective, who would see their scores. But in fact, when we looked at the data and got really good at estimating their family incomes, we found that there were about 35,000 of them. In other words, there were 9 times as many as anyone had thought before. Now, how could it be that 8/9 of the low-income high achievers were off everyone's radar? Well, the next couple of charts are going to show you why they were. This is showing you what applications look like for high-income high achievers, high-income students who are high achievers in the top 10%. And you can see that mostly what they do is they send applications to colleges and universities that we call peer institutions or safety institutions. In other words, where their scores are very well matched to those of the median student. There are a few high-income high achievers who send applications to non-selective colleges. Those are the ones way on the left, but that's fairly rare. Let's look at exactly the same sort of chart for low-income high achievers. What you'll see is that the majority only apply to non-selective colleges and universities, and only about 8% are applying to peer and safety schools in the same way that the high-income high achievers do. So the schools simply were not seeing the vast, vast majority of the low-income high achievers. They were not on anyone's radar screen. Well, what did we do? We considered all of the possible explanations for the behavior gap. And the first explanation we considered was the prohibitive cost of selective colleges. Maybe they're just too expensive for these families. Okay, I'm going to show you some evidence that that's not true. Maybe the explanation is that even if they apply, they don't get in. Or if they get in, they don't thrive at selective colleges. They do badly, they drop out. I'm going to show you also that that's not true. The next 2 explanations suggest that someone is blundering. Someone just isn't making any effort. Either the colleges aren't really trying to recruit them, despite what they say, Or maybe high school counselors, despite having a lot of low-income high achievers come to them and ask for help, really aren't trying to guide them through the college application process. I'm going to show you that that's very unlikely to be true, either of those things. That's going to leave us with two explanations, either that the students just don't aspire to go to selective colleges because of reasons of culture or family reasons, or that the students really need better information about their college-going opportunities. Okay? And that's what we're going to look at. So this chart shows you the costs of going to college for colleges that are from the most selective in the United States, those are at the very top, listed as most competitive, to colleges that are non-selective. And the light blue bars show you the comprehensive cost. That's tuition, fees, room, and board. Okay? And what you can see is that the least selective colleges tend to cost less than the most selective colleges. But that's what a student would pay if they were paying the full cost. The dark blue bars show you how much a student who was in the lowest quarter of the family income distribution would have to pay. And for them, the picture is completely different. In fact, the cheapest colleges for them are the most competitive colleges. So in fact, what we found was that low-income students were routinely paying much more to attend colleges with much lower resources. And the differences among these colleges are big. The colleges at the top not only cost more money, but they spend between 10 and 20 times more on instruction, and they have graduation rates that are about 12 times higher than the colleges at the bottom. So there are big differences among them. The next explanation that we considered was whether low-income high achievers wouldn't be able to thrive if they applied to very selective colleges and universities. And the answer there is they do thrive, and they do get admitted when they apply. Chris Avery and I looked at every single student in the high school graduating class of 2008, not some of them. We looked at 100% of them, and we followed them all the way through their college careers. And what we found was that if you were a low-income high achiever, you were equally likely to be admitted and equally likely to do well and graduate on time as a high-income student with exactly the same incoming test scores and grades. So really, what mattered was getting them to apply. Once they applied, these low-income students looked just like their high-income counterparts. So that wasn't the explanation. The next explanations we considered were maybe they just weren't being recruited by colleges. So we looked to see where they were. This is what's called a heat map, and it shows you the continental United States. It's redder in the areas where there are more low-income high achievers per 17-year-old in the population. So you can see they're all over the place. A lot of them are in Appalachia and the Midwest, but they're just all over the place. And in fact, they're in all of the metropolitan areas of the United States, which are the little black dots here. But if you look at the low-income high achievers, the 8% of them who already apply to selective colleges and universities, this is what the heat map looks like. You can see that they're all concentrated in just a few places, and a lot of the heat map is white, right? Showing you that no one is applying from those places. And in fact, 70% of the low-income high achievers who already apply to selective colleges and universities are coming from just 15 out of the 320-some metropolitan areas. And in fact, it's more than that. It's the case that colleges recruit any student who is a low-income high achiever and who comes from a high school where there are at least 20 other low-income high achievers. In fact, there are no high achievers who are not picked up if they are in what we think of as a cluster of other high achievers, if they go to an exam school, if they go to a magnet school, things like that. Okay? So it's clear that the remaining 8/9 of the low-income high achievers, the problem is that they're dispersed. That doesn't mean that they're rural, it just means that usually they're one of the only high achievers in their high school. And they cannot be picked up by methods that, like a college mentoring program, that require a little cluster of high achievers. Okay, so it's not that colleges aren't trying or that high school guidance counselors just aren't helping the bundle of low-income high achievers in front of them. All right, so now we are down to some takeaways, because I think I want to set up the experiment that we did and explain how it is that we solved the problem. So the first takeaway is that there are just a lot more low-income high achievers than anyone thought. The second is that cost per se is not the reason they're not applying to selective colleges and universities. We saw that wasn't true. We also saw that they thrive at peer colleges when they go there. So the right explanation is not that they couldn't make it at the selective colleges if they were to be there. It's the application stage where they diverge from the high-income high achievers. After that, they behave pretty much just like them. It doesn't make sense to blame the colleges or blame college counselors. These students are relatively isolated in their high schools. They're not that easy to recruit or find. And finally, any solution to this problem is going to have to deal with the fact that these students are dispersed. In other words, you and I can't set up a little counseling organization and hope that students will come to us and that we'll be able to solve the problem with in-person work. Sarah Turner and I devised something called the Expanding College Opportunities Project. And this project had several goals. The first was to close the information gap for students and really give them equal educational opportunities. But we needed to do this in a way that could reach all 35,000 low-income high achievers in the United States, despite the fact that they were dispersed. We also wanted it to be inexpensive so that it could be done in perpetuity, not just done once as an experiment with some philanthropic money. We also really wanted to make sure that we evaluated this intervention in a scientific way, so we did a randomized controlled trial where some students got the informational intervention and some randomly chosen students were in the control group and got nothing at all. And that's very important for testing the explanation that it's really information as opposed to the explanation that it has something to do with culture or family. That's the only way we're going to be able to test the information hypothesis versus other things, but that's what we wanted to do. Let me tell you a little bit about the experiment that we did. It involved 40,000 students, most of them who were low-income students. All of them were high achievers. Each student received materials that were customized to his or her locality and family income. So imagine a student from eastern Iowa, and the student would receive materials that showed his or her local community college, the local public college, some local private colleges, the most selective public and private universities in the state of Iowa, and then a sprinkling of other colleges that looked like they were pretty appropriate from the rest of the United States. This student would not just know about what these colleges' graduation rates were and how much they spent on instruction and things like that, but the student would also find out how much it would cost his family or her family to go to those colleges. Not the sticker prices, how much it would cost them after all the financial aid and scholarships. Okay, so highly customized materials. We also gave the students 8 fee waivers to apply to college, free of application fees. Those fee waivers are actually already available to all low-income students in the United States, so we weren't actually giving them anything they couldn't have already had, but we gave them fee waivers without any paperwork. And it cost us about $6 a student. Now, all of the customization took a lot of data gathering. We built this huge database to do the customization, but once you've built the database, it doesn't really cost much to send the materials to an additional student. That's why it costs only $6. Well, what were the effects? Students submitted about 48% more applications relative to the control group if they got the intervention. And they were 78% more likely to be admitted to a peer college if they got the intervention compared to the control group. Not only that, they didn't just apply more and get admitted to more selective colleges, they were 46% more likely to enroll in a peer college than the students in the control group. Now, we're following all these students through their entire college careers, freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year, and what we are seeing is that the students who were induced by the intervention to attend more selective colleges have higher grades, are paying less to attend college, and are more likely to persist staying in college, not dropping out, than the students who are in the control group. So these students are having lives that are really amazingly different for $6 a pop. All right, when I think back to when Chris Avery and I first looked at the data and thought, you know, maybe there are more low-income high achievers than anyone thought, I'm kind of amazed at how far we've come because it wasn't really that long ago. What have we learned? The first thing that we've learned is there are a lot of low-income high achievers. It's not that being a low-income person means that you cannot achieve highly. That's just not true. And it's also not true that they don't aspire to go to the best college or university that will admit them. They do. We also showed that you could really overcome information barriers with highly customized information. And we showed that a partial solution can be achieved immediately with gathering the sort of big data and doing the sort of analytics that we did. In fact, the College Board is doing it this year for 100% of low-income students who take a College Board test and turn out to be high achievers, and the ACT is going to start doing it approximately next year. Now, the direct benefits to these students are tremendous. Much higher lifetime earnings, really totally transformed lives. But we also think that they will be ambassadors for colleges to their home communities and their home high schools, and that other low-income students will realize, wow, maybe there are a lot of benefits to becoming a high achiever. So we hope that there's much more to come. We think it's a gold mine that we've been able to open up by sending information, by closing this information gap for low-income high achievers. Thank you.